All right, we're live. Very cool. Hi, everyone. My name is Erica Eiderhoven. I'm running for state representative in Somerville for the 27th Middlesex, and I am very excited to be joined here today with Somerville City Councilor JT Scott.
Howdy. Hey, Eric. Good to see you. Good to see you.
Awesome. Yeah, great having you on. Thanks so much for joining. So today we're here to discuss the People's Bailout, Decarceration, and COVID-19. But before we get started, I just wanted to maybe say a few words of introduction, particularly from JT around, why I brought him on and sort of, what he's sort of embodied for me as a city councilor. I think that, one of the things that in my campaign that's really important to me is that we champion and fight for policies that put working people first, not markets, not corporations, not other whatever, distractions we want to talk about. To me, working people come first. And in a way, it's sort of become like a trope in politics to say, yeah, I stand with working people. And it's really easy to say, right? Because who's going to disagree with you for being for working people? But we see so little of that in our government, both, at all levels. And I think particularly at the federal level, the last few weeks we've seen, the federal coronavirus relief bill, the CARES Act, embodies to me the opposite of putting working people first. It puts trillions of dollars into corporations and bailing out, but they don't bail out people. And so I think that's something we want to ground our discussion around. And I just wanted to maybe hand the mic over to JT to share with us what putting working people first at the municipal level has meant for him. And in particular, for me, the first thing that comes to mind is housing, but I'll let JT kind of take it from there.
Well, I mean, you're not wrong. Housing is an incredibly huge issue here in Somerville, and I think it's been wonderful to see how things have changed. The climate has changed around that discussion since the 2017 election, when not just me, but us, a large group of more progressive, radical, let's call us, city councilors ran to displace incumbents and change the tenor of the discussion. And it really has changed. And I think it's stunning when you look at some measures that we've been able to pass, whether they are items that are solely within local control or home rule petitions that then have to go to the State House to get approved, items that would have been lost in committee or in discussion for forever have been able to get passed on almost consensus basis, many of them unanimously. And I'm talking about tenant protections, I'm talking about tenant right of first refusal, I'm talking about a transfer fee on real estate transactions that would help us to fund affordable housing measures. And I think a lot of that comes from having representatives get elected who come from a different stance, who aren't beholden to a specific donor class. It was interesting to look at in those campaigns, the wave of people, myself included, who just said, we're not going to accept any real estate developer or real estate lawyer contributions because we feel like we are here to represent the people. And it's hard to represent the people when you're reliant on this real estate funding. And as much as I'd love to change campaign finance in general, it was really inspiring and I don't know how to say it, satisfying to see a bunch of underfunded, crowd-funded campaigns beat both incumbents, which have a major advantage, but also beat people who are outspending these campaigns by 3 or 4x. So it's been wonderful to see that that's possible, and it's been wonderful to see what we've been able to do on the housing front as a result. And it's just a delight to work with these people.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's one of the things too I've explained a lot back when I used to knock on doors. Unfortunately can't do that at the moment, but people have asked me, like, what are you going to do about housing? And so I'll talk through my affordable housing policy. But my next thing is like, look, you can also count on me to put your priorities first, because I'm not taking money from developers, period, hard stop. And I think that's something that's really important to even, everyone across various demographics in Somerville, because they've seen what that looks like when electeds put for-profit developers first over the needs of the community, over community benefits agreements and all that. So I think that's really important. I think also to kind of build on our current discussion around COVID-19, I think this crisis has really really exposed but exacerbated some of the flaws in our current and structural flaws in our system, both in terms of the fact that it is a crisis that just has made everything that was, people have been working paycheck to paycheck before the crisis happened. The crisis made it worse. There's a second kind of dimension to that too, that the nature of the disease actually puts collective safety and health first, right? Because we are only as safe and as healthy as the most vulnerable people in our society. It means that it is in our best interest, and should have always been, but the disease has made it even more clear that it's in our best interest for everyone to have fundamental human rights like housing, food, shelter, having healthcare. These are all things that, because we don't have a society that puts working people like that first, we've seen the flaws kind of exposed for that and for what they are. And that's why we picked sort of the two discussions around the people's bailout as well as decarceration, speaking of people who are in the most vulnerable situations. Having people locked up and unable to socially distance has not only been morally wrong, but now it's actually putting all of our health at stake for continuing to have the current state we're in. So that's kind of the two topics we wanted to cover during this live stream. But I think I want to start off with the people's bailout piece and coming back to the federal bill that does not actually bail out people, both on sort of a individual lens, right? But also, a lot of the things that particularly, there's two pieces. One is bailing out people, but then also providing the services that we need to provide. And that comes from the municipal level. And the municipalities are getting hit incredibly hard financially and are not will be cash strapped or unable to put people first because of just the financial situation if there isn't relief coming our way. And so I think that's something I wanted to focus on in our discussion. And maybe, JT, if you could kick us off a little bit around like what the situation is with the municipal budget and the fact that, municipalities are going to be on the front lines of providing things like emergency shelters, emergency, kind of makeshift hospitals, healthcare services, all those things that are going to fall on municipalities to execute, and what's preventing, why that people's bailout should have included, funding for municipalities first that would help people and put people first.
Well, I think funding for municipalities would have been helpful, but just taking it back to what you said earlier, municipalities are absolutely on the front line in this, and they have been since the start, since we saw the governor's response being slow and obviously the federal response being completely inadequate. Neighbors take care of our neighbors, right? And so there's nobody closer to this than municipal government. And unfortunately, there's nobody more constrained in terms of what we can do financially than municipal government. So we're working very hard to create safety nets to fill the holes, like you said, that the gaps that have been just so clearly exposed by this current situation. They were always there, but now they're costing people's lives. So we are required at the local level. We're looking at how to set up, expanded hospital services, quarantine housing situations. We are the densest city in all of New England, and in these overcrowded housing conditions, when somebody gets sick, that puts everybody else in the building at risk. And so as we're looking at how to create these fallback systems, whether it's food for the kids in our school system, diapers, just getting people supplies they need to shelter in place. It does put an incredible strain on the system. So from a people's bailout standpoint, if we actually had a bailout that allowed people, that gave people what they needed to stay in place, the strain on our systems wouldn't be as great. And so, the more we can do to help people be resilient and be resourced in their own, the less the municipality is going to have to help pick them up. There's still going to be a role for that. But that's, for me, as much as I'd love to see more funding come to cities as a result of this, it's more important that funding go directly to people so that they can take care of themselves and take care of their neighbors. And then, each layer of government after that can try to catch as many people as possible. But right now there are a lot of people to catch, and the city efforts are all on trying to create robust systems as quickly as possible. But that's all going to cost money, and it's going to be a real challenge. In 2008, the last big downturn, there were big corporate bailouts. But what's lost in that a little bit is how much that hit municipal budgets. The city of Somerville's budget shrank dramatically in 2009, 2010. State aid to Somerville shrank by $10 million each of those years, and it led to having to cut back services. It led to cuts in salaries for union employees at the city level. And anytime that those services get cut back, it's very hard on the people who depend on those services, those least vulnerable. And at this point, this is a moment when we need to be expanding those services, not cutting them back because of austerity. So it's
Absolutely.
a real.
Yeah, no, and I think like it's interesting to draw that comparison to 2008 because it's a crisis we all remember, most of us, not all of us, but most of us remember. And I think it's interesting because at the time, right, when they did the bailout of the banks, the line of argument was, well, we got to bail out the banks because otherwise there's going to be financial instability and all that. Like that, that's why we need to bail out the banks first.
Yeah, we got to keep people working.
Yeah, exactly. So, and a lot of people, bought that narrative. They believed it. And what's interesting about COVID-19 is this is not about a financial instability. It's about the fact that we literally cannot, unless you put your life on the line, go to work right now. And it's sort of upended this whole market ideology that, all workers are just to work and to make money for corporations, and that's it. And now it's like, well, it's in our health, in our best interest not to be working right now. People literally cannot. There are people who cannot do their job. And there are people who are and are putting their lives on the line, to do so, because that's if they're healthcare workers or, kind of the essential services that need to happen. And it's interesting because the bailout is not oriented around, okay, this is a situation where people can't work, because people aren't workers fundamentally, they're people first, right? And the bailout wasn't oriented anywhere around that. It wasn't saying, all right, if we have to put a pause on our economy, pause on everything moving, and just stop a lot of the activities that happen for a certain period of time, how do we ensure that people who are in those jobs can stay home, self-isolate, and do what's in the best interest of everyone, which is to stay healthy and stay safe. And that's where, I've been a proponent of, obviously we should put a moratorium on rents and mortgage payments. I mean, that's a critical, that's one of the biggest costs, right, on an individual or on a family. But more importantly, I mean, there needs to be this need of like, okay, there is a guaranteed flow of money into my household that will pay for food, utility, all the things I need to pay to keep a roof over my head. And a lot of countries have done that. They've said, okay, every 2 weeks you're going to get a check. And it's a check to kind of keep everything afloat, because nothing should go out of business. You should not file for bankruptcy because of a pandemic. That it's only because of the pandemic that we're on pause right now, and we haven't seen any of that really. There's potentially a $1,200 check coming, potentially in the next 4 months if you filed your taxes, and all these if, buts, and ands that are in there to prevent you. And so I think that's kind of been the real problem. And then the question is like, so who can provide that relief? And the first answer for everyone is the federal government, right? That's where naturally where we've seen big moments like the Great Depression, Great Recession. That's where they come in the assumption that that's not happening after what we've seen with this bill. The next question is, well, okay, what can our state or local government do about it? And it's true that state of Massachusetts has some restrictions around the fact that we need to have a balanced budget, but it has a much broader mandate to raise money. And I think that kind of highlights this problem overall, that we have the money to take care of everyone as a country. It's a question of political will to do so. And so, JT, I'd love to have you here, share a little bit more about, that difference between what the municipalities can do and what state government do, assuming that the federal government is what it is and it's what's happening and what we've seen over the past few weeks, which is, a travesty itself, but just to keep our focus on state and local stuff, like what could the state do versus what the municipalities can do?
Well, I mean, we're at the city level, we're urging the state to take a lot of these actions. And one of the things you said there is exactly on the money. We need to be giving people the means to do what is necessary in this crisis. I think back in 2008, there was maybe this an ability to hold on to an idea, if you bought into it, that the best thing you can do is work hard and keep on going. And now we're forced by reality to say the best thing you can do is to stop. Just stop, please. If there was a public works project where we could be building, digging ditches and building infrastructure to get out of a pandemic, great, let's put our stimulus there, but that's not the situation we're in. If we need a lot of people to dig ditches, we're in a much worse situation right now.
Mm-hmm.
So, we need to put our stimulus towards those areas. And if that stimulus isn't coming at the federal level in the trillions that it's needed, what can be done at the state level is to do some of the same kind of state interventions that we've seen in Europe,
Mm-hmm.
like a mortgage moratorium, like a rent freeze. If we can't get people money to pay those costs, we can stop those costs.
Yeah.
I think that's an absolutely reasonable and necessary thing that we can do. There's some bills right now in the State House. There's a big vote coming up tomorrow. Unfortunately, due to the opacity of the State House, we can't really see what the Senate bill is yet. We can't see what the reconciliation process is looking like. But really pushing on our state senators to get to something that's much closer to the House bill that actually does freeze mortgage payments, not just for residential users, but also for business users, because that's another piece of it, right? We do want people to have a place to go back to work, for all these neighborhood services to continue to exist after this is over. But if we leave small businesses out of it, they won't be there. And unfortunately, that's also part of the problem with the federal stimulus. I tell you, it gives me heartburn every time I log into Facebook now and I see, hey, great assistance from the SBA, the paycheck protection, this emphasis on, well, we'll just give money to the businesses and they'll keep giving people their paychecks and that'll make the whole system work. Well, A, not so much. B, what's in that package only goes for 2.5 months of payroll, and that's not enough to get us through this thing. And C, banks aren't lending on this money. And I've got a call with Ayanna Pressley later today, and then a call with Ed Markey after that to talk about some of these problems in the federal implementation and how we need to be doing more. Mm-hmm. But on the state level, we can absolutely take on debt. We can do the spending for catching people. We can pass moratoria that will pause on these costs. And at the city level, we are capped in what we can do to raise funds. The only place we can get more money to pay for these services that we're providing is through real estate taxes. And that's only going to continue to land on people who are most constrained, whether it's elderly folks living on fixed incomes, right, or tenants who get gouged by their landlord once rent resumes. Whereas the state level, the ability to levy an income tax, and a graduated income tax at that, is an incredibly powerful opportunity. I mean, I think you talked about Mike Connolly's tax bill a few times, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I mean, I think the need for having, I think that's one of the things I like to highlight, just the difference between state and local governments is that, the state has a much broader mandate in terms of raising revenue and, taxing people so that the wealthy and corporations pay their fair share. And I think that's something that at this local level, the municipal level, it's incredibly challenging. At the state level, unfortunately, our state hasn't done enough. And in fact, we are actually, since the late 70s, the state that has cut our state government taxes the most, apart from Alaska and Arizona, who are deep blue state, two deep red states. We are number 3 in terms of the most tax cuts at the state level. And so, things like Mike Connolly's bill around capital gains, we could be taxing, there's estate taxes, there's taxing endowments, right? We literally are next door to universities that have, I don't want to quote a number because I'm not sure how much, but literally globs of money too, could be helping with this relief. And so I think that's something that the state level, we could be taking really bold action on in the absence of what's happening at the federal level. And it's been something that's been incredibly hard to ever push for because of, unfortunately, the sort of priorities we put, right? And I think it's just important to emphasize too that budgets aren't just budgets. It sounds really boring, but they're actually all about priorities and values, right? Because where we put our money and where we put, state or local resources says what we prioritize as a society. And by keeping, corporate taxes low, we're actually far below the national average. I think if we tax corporations at the national average, we would have nearly $3 billion more in revenue per year. I mean, that is money that could be going towards relief. That could be money that's, even outside of COVID-19, going to education, healthcare, housing. I mean, all the things that we need to see. Oh, climate crisis, most importantly as well. So I think it's just like important to emphasize, because it's something that municipalities are often left cornered in a way, because they can't raise taxes apart from property taxes, and there's a limit on how much debt you all can take as a city. And I'm talking about Somerville specifically, but this is the case with municipalities across the state. That like we are looking to our state governments, or our state government, to do more, and unfortunately they haven't done very limited stimulus relief to the local level, or to people for that matter.
Well, and it's going to get worse too. Mm-hmm. As the state's finances get constrained, if trends continue, what we'll see is another $10 or $20 million cut in local aid to all these cities and towns that are already in a tight spot. Yeah. And this trend over the decades of cutting back on state resources that are obviously showing themselves to be absolutely essential right now is also true when it comes to cities. So Prop 2.5 famously limits how much cities can raise taxes in any given year. So even with that, it puts cities in an absolutely impossible position to respond to this, when right now lives are depending on cities responding to this. Right. I'm glad that Somerville isn't acting out of a sense of scarcity. We are doing what is necessary in this moment. But it's going to lead to some very, very difficult conversations in 2021, 2022. And that's one of the reasons why I think it's essential for the people that are in the State House to have the willingness to take bold measures, to take bold steps that, like you said, for the last several decades, just the will for it hasn't been there, which is sad to admit in a blue supermajority state. But it's going to be more important now than ever. That we have that will to take action, and collective action, right? As a state, we all have to come together to do this.
And just to we don't have to go too far into the numbers, but I think something you shared with me recently that I thought was really profound, just to kind of share the urgency and magnitude of the need for the state to move forward, especially around like what's happening with the budget with with specifically Somerville, and how much we are, the loss that we're seeing this month, as well as, in terms of just like how much, I guess to just kind of share the order of magnitude of how much we need the state to step in. If you could just share a little bit about that. I mean, given that you're your position in city council and what you work on in your committees.
Sure. Well, I'm the chair of the finance committee, so obviously this is it's weighing on me a lot. Some of the ways that we got out of the 2008, 2009, 2010 downturn was the state actually passed legislation enabling cities to have other tax revenue sources, and big on those was a local meals excise tax and a local hotel excise tax. Well, here in this crisis, they are hit just as hard, if not harder, as everything else. So those aren't going to be tools that are going to help us dig out of this. And in fact, those wells have dried up. Mm-hmm. So between building permits, which again, we're in a construction moratorium. We don't want construction workers in the streets, crowding these sites, getting sick, and then taking it home to spread to the rest of the Commonwealth. So with building permit fees cut off, with hotels excise dropping to nearly zero, with meals taxes dropping precipitously, it's not zeroed out. There's still people doing takeout, but even people doing takeout business are seeing, 5-10% of their usual business volume. So that's leading to $1 million a month hole in the budget every month that this goes on. And we're looking at this going on in July, right? Needing to maintain these restrictions. So that's a multi-million-dollar hole that we're seeing in the budget right now, just for the services we were already provided. Early guess, we're looking at over $100,000 burn rate a week. That's what we've been spending to this point, trying to respond to this in emergency COVID response services. So, these things add up very, very fast. And, we could be seeing 10% reduction in city budgets. And that's just the absolute wrong direction we need to be going for taking care of people right now.
Yeah, and it really underlines like the role and the need for state or federal government to step in a time of a crisis like this, where it's the safest thing to do is stay at home. But then how do we make sure that municipalities have the tools to push for that, or to push for protecting our people, right, and putting people first. And I think kind of leading to that, I want to shift to the other part of our discussion around decarceration. I think something that we discussed earlier is like every sentence now is a death sentence if we let things stay as they go. And so, JT, do you want to kick us off and share a few words about that piece?
Yeah, I mean, it's horrific. We're seeing the deaths not just in New York. We're seeing deaths in the Massachusetts incarcerated population. We're seeing dramatically expanded infection rates amongst both officers that work in these facilities and absolutely amongst prisoners. And it's tragic because we can be doing more. There are over 300 people that are currently incarcerated that not just are eligible for parole, have been paroled, and are just waiting for the board to issue the letter saying, okay, fine, let them go. Mm-hmm. They have already been voted on. They've already been paroled, and they are stuck in a horrific situation where they cannot social distance. And this is, we talk about social distancing and how important it is for everybody to do that, but for these people, it is a complete impossibility. Yeah. And it's not just the people, so not just people that are in the system, it's the people who are in the system and are eligible to get out. And it's the people who right now are sitting in cells upon entry to the system, the people in pretrial detention. Fortunately, there's some conversation around this, but I have been very disappointed by the sheriff's offices, by the Department of Corrections and their responses to multiple court cases on this. Now, there is some work happening at the State House to try to move this forward. I didn't know if you wanted to talk any about that. Lindsay Sabadosa's bill, yes?
Yeah, that's right. There's so Rep. Lindsay Sabadosa of Northampton filed a bill called HD.4963 on decarceration. It's an act. The act regarding decarceration and COVID-19. Unfortunately, it has been co-sponsored by all of the representatives in Somerville, or Somerville delegation, which is great. However, it's unfortunate because the bill has not moved from the judiciary for weeks now since Rep. Sabadosa has filed the bill. And essentially, the bill is pretty simple. It says, if you are not, with the exception of people who pose, quote, like dangerous threat, right? Like there's some, qualification for that. For everyone else, right, if you are in a vulnerable, you're among one of the people who are, classified as vulnerable to the COVID-19 crisis or COVID-19 disease, if you're over 50 and you have, been put, if you've been incarcerated because of possession of, paraphernalia or drugs, you don't stay in prison, period. You get decarcerated, you're let go. And, it's just utterly insane to me that people who have not committed violent crimes, right, are not a threat to our safety, are being stuck in what is effectively a death sentence. I mean, it is literally a ticking time bomb in our prisons right now. And so anyway, her bill is an attempt to, at least a start to, decarcerate the prison population and people in prisons right now. And unfortunately has not moved. It's something that, if you don't care about the moral travesty that is our prison system, right? And it's been an extension of, our legacy of slavery, essentially. But, putting all that aside, if you don't care about, that sort of the moral argument around our prison industrial complex, at the very least, you should believe that these people should not be facing a death sentence. And it's also just it's a safety issue for ourselves too, because we are essentially enabling a broader spread of the virus if we keep people in these situations where they cannot socially distance. It puts us at risk, and also puts for all due respect, people who are working in prisons, they're also at risk as well. And so I think that there's sort of this overlooking the urgent need for this. This is something completely at the state level that we should be doing, and have not seen any movement on over the past few weeks in the State House.
Well, that's exactly right, and it cannot be overstated how bad the conditions are in these prisons. Even when looking at the design capacity or the operating capacity, where they say, well, it wasn't designed to hold this many people, but we shoved in twice as many bunk beds, and so we're able to get more people in there. Every one of the Department of Corrections facilities are well over 100% of the design capacity. Mm-hmm. They're responding that, no, we're keeping people safe. They can socially distance, because on the bunk bed in the cell that are 4 feet apart, we tell them to sleep one with his head on that end and one with his head on that end, and that's just not safe. There is nothing about that that's social distancing. It is horrifying to think about being in that situation where the only thing that you can do to keep yourself safe is not something that's available to you. Mm-hmm. And that's even before you get to the fact that these prisoners right now are being held.
Oh, I think you might have frozen. Let's see. Let's see.
Oh, hey.
Oh, there you go. Okay, you were out for just a few minutes there, for a second there.
Sorry. I was complaining about not having soap in these.
Right. Oh, yeah. Maybe continue from, I think the point where we last heard you was around the conditions around where people are, asked to face different directions when they're falling asleep on the bunk bed as a way of social distancing.
Right. And it's just, A, it's not effective. B, I think it's just cruel to have guards shouting at you saying, well, stay away from each other when you've got people locked in a box together. Yeah. So it is a breeding ground that is going to make the public health situation worse. And it's not just about the guards getting sick. It's about them going home and getting their families sick, spreading it to everybody they come in contact with. We're already seeing shortages in public safety employees, fire and police who are getting infected because they're out there, having to do their jobs because we need them to do their job. Let's cut down on how much we are consciously breeding more of this and making the problems worse. So, I love Sabados's bill, but I think it leads to really exposing one of the problems that the State House has is the current leadership structure means that individual reps aren't really empowered to say, hey, this is a great idea, I want to put it forth, unless there's some kind of buy-in from leadership. Frequently, these things can just sit and die. Yeah. And we've been seeing that change a little bit in recent years where reps like Sabadosa and others will stand up and say, no, this needs attention. Yeah. We need action on this. And, you mentioned the Somerville delegation. I love our Somerville delegation. You can always count on them. I never have to call my Somerville delegation and say, hey, would you just be on the right side of this for once? The Somerville has a proud history, and Rep Provo in this seat in particular is the North Star of just being at the forefront of these issues. It's heartbreaking what's happening right now in the prison system. Governor Baker could fix this in a minute. He could issue clemency for all of these categories of prisoners, people who are in for possession, people who are in, for minor crimes, for parole violations, just immediately parole them. Just issue clemency across the board to at least eliminate the overcrowding that is making the spread of this disease inevitable. But if the governor won't do it, then our state reps, our state senators have the ability to pass legislation to make these things happen, have the oversight over the Department of Corrections to go in and inspect these facilities and demand changes. So it's one of the things that we desperately need leadership from in the State House. And so I'm glad that you're talking about it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's something too, that just to emphasize, this is something I think you and I know very familiarly, but want to share with everyone that, the fact of the matter is, yes, we have a Republican governor and he is failing to take action on these really critical, just morally reprehensible situations that he could be acting on and doing the right thing and are not. And then on the flip side, we have a legislature that is has a super majority. What that means is essentially we have a veto-proof majority. So if, in terms of the Democrats versus Republicans line, unfortunately, we've never really exercised that, at least in the recent history of saying, no, Governor Baker, you're going to do the right thing that we expect you to do. That, I think encompasses what one would call democratic values, right, around just not putting people at bodily harm like we're doing in our prison state. And that's unfortunately just not something that has moved forward on. And yes, to your point, like there's one of the big messages on my campaign is this need for our voices to be in the State House. And not just, it's interesting because when I say voices, I mean that like of voters and activists and grassroots groups and everything, but today, even rank and file, to your point, rank and file state reps don't have a voice. And particularly during this crisis, it's even worse because they're doing everything in informal session. There's about 4 people in the building. The public is not allowed to go in. So actually what, my my current work at Act en Masse, where we have played the role of the watchdog for the State House, we like literally cannot go into the building and say, hey, we saw everything, what happened. So they've closed everything down and sort of essentially done what they've usually done, which is behind, legislating behind closed doors outside the public eye. But now it's even worse because they essentially do everything through informal sessions and with an hour notice. And meanwhile, bills like this haven't moved, even though every day we don't move this bill forward is putting hundreds, if not thousands, of people at risk who should not be at risk. To your point, these 300 people who should not be in prison right now are still there.
At the very least. But what I think is interesting about that is those informal sessions, a bill comes out of the smoke-filled back room of leadership's office and then gets passed in an hour and rank and file hasn't even had a chance to read it. That was already happening.
Oh, yeah.
we at least had the veneer of transparency and, of course there's reporters there, the public's there, people will see this and report on it. And really, before you started doing the work that you've been doing, that wasn't necessarily the case. We could just kind of tell ourselves that, of course, somebody was watching.
Yeah.
And so this is just kind of exposing that the same thing is happening.
Yep.
It's just even more ridiculous because that oversight, that monitoring, it literally can't happen.
Yeah.
And the fact that business is continuing as usual is just as damning comment on the way things have been done as they are about how things are happening right now. It is heartbreaking to see the State House paralyzed in this moment. Mm-hmm. Basically, we're in a crisis. There's nothing, we've tried nothing and we're all out of ideas. Right. So, I think it does speak to what we need to do in the State House. And I guess I was hoping to hear you talk a little bit about how you'd like to see the State House operate, how you'd like to move the needle when you get there. Yeah. And also, some of these policies, what are we going to do to fix this?
Right. Yeah. No. And I think that's one of the things, particularly like, my work with transparency at Act en Masse and pushing for what it means to actually, get people's voices into the State House. And I think one of the first things that we just don't see is reps never have to vote. They never have to go on the record for anything. So I can tell you from, one-on-one conversations with all the different state reps I've spoken to through my work, who's on our side when it comes to affordable housing or who's on our side when it comes to progressive taxation or whatever the issue is. But the fact of the matter is I could not actually tell you who is a champion on those issues because I've never had to really take a hard vote on that. And which is, kind of nuts when you compare that to like the municipal level. You've had to take votes, right? Like you have to go on the record. You have open meeting laws. It's really funny because a lot of things we pushed, our perspective at Act en Masse is we don't believe like, myself, Erica in Somerville is going to go talk to different reps and suddenly they're going to change their minds on anything. They need to hear from their voters. They need to hear from their grassroots groups. They need to hear from the unions in their district. And so we've had people, we've said like, this is the issue and sort of organized different groups in different districts to go talk to their rep. And it's funny because the most effective, well, not most effective, but one of the more sort of, there's the ways the reps kind of socially engineer their way out of that conversation to say, well, I've done everything I can and all that. But the one person they can't do that to is a town meeting member or school committee member, right? Because they'll say, I don't understand. I'm subject to open meeting law. It's a pain in the butt and I have to do it. Why don't you have to do it?
Right.
So I think exposing that piece, and then as a legislator, what that means to me is that we do need to have on the record votes on critical issues. I could go on and on all day, but just to take a few good examples. Progressive taxation is one, right? We need to see taxation that isn't regressive. Right now, the lowest income bracket in Massachusetts pays the highest share of their income in taxes, and the wealthiest pay the smallest share. That's completely backwards from what most people expect taxes to be. And even when you're a hardcore, anti-government libertarian, they want at least a flat tax. And it's not even that, it's worse than that, right? And I'm not for that, but I'm for progressive tax. But, any sort of forced vote on progressive taxation, I think, is absolutely critical. We've never seen that happen. No one's, if they do pass sort of any sort of taxation, it's done behind closed doors and all wrapped up together into one package that they all vote unanimously in favor of. That's not putting people on the record for tough votes. I think another example too is the Safe Communities Act. And we've talked about decarceration. Another part of this is immigrant detainees. And even just, this is not in Massachusetts, it's right across the border in Rhode Island, but immigrant detainees are on hunger strike because of the conditions they're being put through. And our community in Somerville, which, a huge percentage of our city are immigrants. And even if they're documented, so to speak, still live in fear of how, the police or ICE will treat them. There's a bill, Safe Communities Act, which would protect, at least take a step where I would not say it's not a super strong bill. It basically says we cannot work with ICE, or at least our local police force can't. That's a bill that's been killed 4 times. And it's been, before it was a Trust Act, now it's a Safe Communities Act. This predates Trump, and we've never seen a vote on it in the House. The Senate's voted on it. They voted almost nearly unanimously every time, and the House has never voted on it. Another good example too is wage theft. $700 million a year are stolen from low-income people from wage theft through vicarious liability, lack of vicarious liability. And that's a bill too, 3 times, Senate unanimous nearly, I think this one was actually unanimous, with 120 co-sponsors out of 160 in the House. That's nearly a supermajority co-sponsorship, and they haven't had a vote on it, right? So these are things that we need reps in there who are willing to take bold action and say, that's it, we're going to vote on this. There is a deadline. We cannot keep kicking the can down the road, because the other side of how the State House works is they slow everything down in every way possible, right? There's a procedural way to slow things down. There's a way to say, you know what, we haven't heard, we haven't had the committee votes, we haven't had the, the testimonies, all these different excuses that come into play. And slowing things down isn't a political act in itself, right? It's easy to say, look, we're just thinking about it and we're thinking it through and we want to make sure we have all the research, but that's not what's happening. It's a tactic to literally prevent policies that put working people first from happening. And every day we don't pass those policies is an act of violence in itself, right? And so that's, I think the most clear example of that is this decarceration bill, because literally each day we have people stuck in the condition they're in is a death sentence. But it's the case with any sort of, lack of funding for our schools, for healthcare, for, raising, taxes to pay for all these things. These are all things that are materially affecting our lives. And by kicking the can down the road, we're essentially making a decision to enact. And that is a decision that to me is an outcome of failure. And I think, particularly with the climate crisis, that's I think the most clear one, because we have a 10-year deadline. And so for the State House to say, year after year after year, we don't actually push anything through is an act in itself. And so almost to not fight for, a vote on these issues, to not force it and not say, look, we're not going to vote on this, it's a failure. It's a collective failure of our legislature. And that's something that I'm committed to changing. So I hope that provides a little bit of sort of the tactical piece of what I'm planning to do to go in there. And I think the other side of it is that it's not just about me going in there and doing the right thing, right? I'm not an expert, right? I know a lot about the State House, but I'm not going to win because of my expertise, so to speak. We're going to win because of grassroots organizing and people pushing from the ground up. And we've seen people push, but there hasn't been enough of that working together between grassroots groups and the legislature to say, okay, we're going to force this to happen. We know who's on our side, who's not, and we're going to make this happen. And unfortunately, we haven't seen enough of that. And I think my background organizing and working with groups across the state, and particularly in Somerville, enables that to happen. And that's the only way I can see that being successful. Because if I just go in there and kick up a storm and no one's there to say, hey, this is actually our issue, that's not going to result in anything. So I think there's an importance of having both. And that's what I mean by bringing voices into the State House that haven't been there before.
Well, I think you're exactly right. And I think it's great that you actually mentioned Safe Communities Act and wage theft. Those are 2 things that the Somerville City Council, and let me tell you, our salaries are not that good and we don't have any staff. But the Somerville City Council, without support from any outside group, made those things happen. here in Somerville at the local level. And they've been sitting just dead in the water at the State House. So it is really a question of political will, and that political will being backed by organizing. There's no way I could have written that wage theft law, even though I'm credited as the main author. It was all the work of the different activist communities, the advocate community that had come together, that was a large number of unions and worker coalitions and worker centers that came in, got their input, brought legal assistance from Greater Boston Legal Services, and we made this thing happen. But that being said, you say, well, my expertise in the State House isn't going to get it done. We're going to need that backing on the outside. It's important to have those advocates at the State House that do have that expertise, because we saw here in Somerville when Union Square, we had a great activist community I was part of fighting against this tucked in developer deal. And we worked we were in the streets. We were mobilizing our neighbors. We were flyering. We were doing everything. Just a real organizer textbook campaign. But we were still losing because at the city council level, the incumbent city councilors were just rubber stamping the deals one after another. Nobody would stand up and say, this has to stop. And out of 11, there were 3 at one point who said, wait a second, let's slow roll this. And, the mayor and the city council at large just ran them right over. And that's changed. Now that we have people in the legislature who come from that activist background and do have the expertise, we were actually able to hold the line on certain authorizations that the developer needed to support the activist community and say, these aren't getting granted. We're not acting on this until the activist community comes in and says, yes, we've gotten to where we need to go. We've gotten that community benefits agreement. So don't shortchange the value that your expertise in the State House, your mileage of seeing how these things go wrong, even. It will have incredible value, but it does have to stay grounded in that activism. And with that, maybe it's a good time to talk about, what can we be doing right now for expanding justice? Because we've talked about decarceration. That's a lot of that is on the governor. We didn't actually talk about voting rights at all, but Wisconsin is on my mind because how could it not be today?
Right.
And looking at your election in September 1st, Move-in Day, great.
Move-in Day, that's great. And great time for Somerville to vote.
Nothing happens in Somerville on September.
Nothing happens on September 1st. Not like 1 in 3 times.
I hope we're not in lockdown on September 1st. Having expanded mail-in, we talked about this in the city council meeting last night. We need Secretary of State Galvin to change the policies on this, and he's not. So outreach to the Secretary of State, the governor. And I think we were talking about the rent freeze and mortgage freeze bill. That's coming up too. It's is that vote scheduled for tomorrow?
Today or tomorrow, on the Senate side, because they voted on the House side last week.
Okay. Yeah. And the first Senate bill was not a great one. So if there's if anybody out there wants to call our state senator, I'm sure everybody watching this is in the 27th Middlesex for your family. My family, I don't know, watching somewhere on Facebook, but if you can call Pat Jalen, as the state senator, I know she's very strong on this stuff, but calling the speaker, the House Speaker, I think would go a long way as well. So, and when it comes to these prisoners, the governor could act right now. Yeah.
Absolutely. No, it's really, there's a lot that can be done right now, and unfortunately hasn't been. And so definitely calling your senator, your reps on these issues is so critical. And even, I don't think this is going to stop here with even the moratorium on the rent freeze and the mortgage payments freeze bill, because even that was, it gives us 30 days after the state of emergency is lifted to pay back all your rent and mortgage payments. 30 days to, and if this crisis goes on for 4 or 5 months, you need to make up a quarter of a year or a third of a year of the largest expense, right? I don't know how you're going to magically make that much money in a month in 30 days, but that's something that we're probably going to keep pushing for, because people are going to face the pain of that and aren't going to be able to pay. And not for any reason other than the fact that there was this crisis, right? So the way we write the laws are so important. I also want to elevate a few of the groups that organize around these issues, because I think that's also a critical piece. Is that yes, we're in the midst of a crisis right now. We're going to continue having to push these issues after this crisis, and so we want to elevate some of the criminal justice advocacy groups and activist groups. Mass Bail Fund. I know JT, you have a friend who works or does work with them in terms of providing people just cash bail. I mean, we shouldn't have cash bail.
And these people are sitting there because they just didn't have the money in pocket to get out, and it's worse than that too. When Mass Bail Fund goes down to try to bail them out, they've got the cash in hand, and still these people sit in prison for
they're still not let out.
Reasons. So, yeah, Mass Bail Fund is a really important organization. Right now, they are getting people out of prison when our government won't, and so that's getting them out of jail. And it's vitally important. If we can support them right now and what they're doing, they're making a difference in people's lives. Peoplenotprisons.org is another good one to call out. They've been putting out weeks of action that people can get to. Can I see this? Yes, I can see that.
Here's the link right now for the Decarceration organizing for the week of action. It's a tiny URL.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah. No, that's an amazing link. So if you can check that out, that's and I'll try to put that also in our comment section as well to go to their action. They have kind of the list too of like who to call. I found that really helpful because they kind of list through all the different people in elected office to call pertaining to decarceration this week. And so that's a really helpful resource. I just put that in the comments. I think another group too that I want to elevate is the Emancipation Initiative. This is some work that I've done with Act en Masse in terms of, this is a huge surprise for people, but people who are incarcerated do not have the right to vote in our state. It is an incredible violation of your constitutional right. The fabric of our democracy relies on people being able to vote. It should not matter if you are incarcerated or not. And when you hear about the reasons why people are incarcerated, I mean, there's two sides to this. One, they should not be incarcerated to begin with, but the fact that you lose your ability to vote based on nonviolent crimes, it's just, it's atrocious. And so one of the things that we organized around last year was that the Committee on Election Laws sent that bill to study. It was it's a constitutional amendment to enable the incarcerated to vote. They sent it to study, and they would not tell us how they voted. So it was just completely voted on behind closed doors, and essentially said, all right, we're not going to vote on, we're going to vote this down. We're not going to go on the record for it. We actually called through and asked every rep and senator, how did you vote on this bill? We deserve to know how you voted, right? We had a few, Republicans and tell us, yep, I definitely voted it down. And we had a few Democrats tell us, yes, I definitely voted it up. But most of the committee would not tell us how they voted on this critical issue that affects people's basic rights in a democracy. And so the Emancipation Initiative has been an incredible org that's been pushing for both ending life and parole as well as for voting rights for the incarcerated.
Yeah, it's critical work, and yet another example that any school committee member or town meeting member in the state hears and says, "You've got to be kidding me! What do you mean they don't know how they voted? Nobody wrote that down. They don't have to." Also, when we're calling out groups that are doing incredible organizing, City Life, Vita Urbana is just on the front lines, keeping people in their homes. I'm sure everybody here is familiar with them. I don't know if there's a link we can post on that, but we really can't say enough for these groups that have been organizing at the grassroots level and doing what's necessary to get people out of prisons and to keep people in their homes. So those are the people we're fighting with, and quite frankly, especially in a public health crisis moment like now, everyone is who we're fighting for.
Yeah.
And we cannot social distance if you're locked in a cage. You cannot shelter in place if you don't have shelter. It is crucial for us to take care of everyone, because none of us are safe until all of us are safe here. So I really appreciate the conversation. And I really appreciate the work that those orgs are doing. And I appreciate everybody. I just saw the comment section rolling over here. So.
Oh yeah, there's a little, we've got some comments, and we had a question from Lauren on Judge Flynn still presiding over Somerville Court. I don't know the answer to that question. JT, do you know?
I don't know if Judge Flynn is in the Middlesex court right now, but what I can say is that what we're doing for diversion isn't enough. You know, this is actually something that I'm having an ongoing conversation with the mayor about, is not just, you know, we have to do defense in depth. And if we're counting on the Middlesex Sheriff's Office to release the people it's holding, that's not going to happen. Yeah, there are some judges out there who are doing a good job and diverting people and denying pretrial incarceration for people. But even at the local police level, we need to change fundamentally how we're approaching violations or any engagement with the public. It's not safe for the police department to be bringing in loads of people, holding them in cells, detaining them there, and then transferring them out. We're just putting more people at risk every time. So, yeah, I can look into that, but even if he is, it's not enough.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Well, I don't see any other questions in the comments field. Just have people sharing. I just want to elevate one comment too around so many options for raising progressive revenue at the state level. Mass Budget did this amazing report on the 14 options for raising progressive revenue. So definitely check that out in the comment section. It's quite informative. You're like, oh wow, this isn't so hard after all. Why are we struggling to raise that raise that revenue? But great. Well, thank you everyone for joining us in the, both in the comments and for watching. We really enjoyed this conversation. Hope it's the beginning of many more. And we want to make sure that we have a, government that includes and has everyone's voices, as well as a transparency around what we're, facing. And so hope to, continue these. And JT, thanks so much for joining. This was a fantastic conversation. I appreciate everyone who took part.
No, thank you. It's wonderful. Especially now, it's hard to get out and meet people. This is just something that I was very excited to offer people as an opportunity to meet somebody who's running for a really crucial role. So thanks for doing it, and thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and if you want to learn more, you can go to electerica.com. That's my website. I think most people know that if you're on my Facebook watching this, but for folks tuning in from JT's. And thank you all so much.
All right.
Take care.